The wind moved like a whisper through the empty valley. Soft, cold, and endless. Snow covered the road that once carried carts of wheat and laughter. Now, it carried only silence and the slow steps of a barefoot boy. Each step sank into the frozen mud, leaving a trail of trembling footprints behind him. He was small, no more than 10, though the hollow in his cheeks made him look older. His clothes hung loose, patched with whatever fabric he had found on his way. A wooden cross swung lightly on his chest, its cord frayed by time. His lips were cracked, and every breath formed a thin cloud before vanishing into the gray air. "Please. I'll work for food," he whispered to no one, a habit now like prayer. For 2 days, he had eaten nothing. He'd found a half-rotten apple under a broken fence the morning before, but even that had not lasted. The hunger had changed the rhythm of his thoughts. He no longer dreamed of games or songs, only of bread, the smell of warmth, the sound of fire. In the distance, a crow cried from the branch of a dead tree. The sound startled him. He stopped and looked around, hugging himself against the cold. His eyes, pale and weary, searched the horizon for smoke, a sign of life. But the land was dead. The war had left it torn and empty, and the few who remained locked their doors at the sight of strangers. He walked again, dragging his feet. The leather strap of his satchel had snapped days ago, so he held it close against his chest. Inside was everything he owned: a faded picture of his mother, a few dry twigs, and a folded piece of paper he could not yet read. The sky began to change, the clouds deepening from white to iron gray. Snowflakes drifted down, slow and hesitant, touching his hair and melting against his skin. He tilted his head back, letting them fall on his tongue, and for a brief moment he smiled. The snow tasted like memory. Clean, quiet, almost kind. He remembered his mother's voice as she hummed a song while kneading dough. "When the hands are tired," she used to say, "the heart must still be strong." He had not heard her voice in months, but it lived in the rhythm of his steps, keeping him moving forward. A sudden gust of wind swept through the valley, carrying with it the scent of smoke. His eyes widened. He turned toward the direction of the wind, his heartbeat quickening. Somewhere beyond the next hill there was a fire and maybe food. He began to walk faster, stumbling over stones hidden beneath the snow. His breath grew louder, his knees weak, but the thought of bread pulled him onward. Each step was a prayer. Please God, let them listen. Please, just one loaf, one bowl. The light began to fade as he reached the crest of the hill. Below him stretched a wide plain, and there, standing against the dying light, was a farmhouse. Its roof was patched with tin, smoke curling gently from the chimney. The smell of something baked, bread surely, reached him through the cold air. For a moment he just stood there, frozen in awe. It looked like something out of a dream. A home. A place where people still believed in warmth. But fear crept in as quickly as hope. What if they turned him away? What if they shouted, or worse, called him a thief, a beggar, a refugee? He'd seen it before. People feared the hungry because the hungry remind them of how fragile comfort truly is. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest, feeling the little cross there. "Please God," he whispered. "Let them see I mean no harm." Then, with the last bit of courage he had, he began walking down the slope toward the farmhouse. As he walked, his voice rose again, a soft plea carried by the wind. "Please. I'll work for food." The sun dipped behind the mountains, leaving only a ribbon of gold across the frozen fields. The boy's figure grew smaller in the distance, swallowed by twilight, but somewhere beyond the wind, perhaps, heaven heard. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and share where you're watching from. Our dream is to reach 1,000 hearts listening to these stories of faith, hope, and redemption. The valley stretched wide and silent beneath the gray sky. It was once a sea of golden wheat, the kind that swayed like prayer in the summer wind. Now it lay barren, soil cracked, fences broken, the color of ashes. The boy's small figure looked lost against the endless horizon. The wind howled softly through the hollowed barns, making the doors creak like old ghosts. A tattered scarecrow leaned crooked in the distance, its straw arms reaching upward, as if begging the heavens for mercy that never came. Each gust of wind carried the smell of burned wood and something older, Sorrow, maybe. The boy pulled his coat tight, though it barely covered his thin frame. His hands were blue with cold. He pressed them under his arms, blowing into them to feel a hint of warmth. He stopped near a broken cart half buried in snow. One of its wheels still turned weakly in the wind, squealing with every rotation. The boy knelt beside it, looking for scraps, nails, anything he might trade or use. But there was nothing left. The world had already taken everything it could. Still, he whispered, "Thank you," under his breath, because that's what his mother taught him to do when he found nothing. Gratitude, she'd said, is what keeps a soul alive when the world forgets your name. He walked again, the sky growing heavier, clouds pressing low. His stomach ached sharply now. He paused to rest beside a frozen ditch and pulled from his satchel the small piece of cloth that once wrapped bread. He brought it to his nose, inhaling what little scent remained, the faint sweetness of flour, the warmth of memory. It made his eyes sting. Somewhere nearby, a crow cawed again. The boy lifted his head. The bird stood on a fence post, black against the pale sky, watching him. Its eyes glimmered with something that wasn't cruelty. Perhaps curiosity. The boy tilted his head slightly and whispered, "Hello." The crow hopped once, then twice before taking flight, its wings cutting through the cold air. The boy followed its path with his gaze. It was flying toward the direction of the farmhouse he'd seen earlier. For a strange moment, he took it as a sign. He rose, tightening the strap of his satchel. The world around him seemed to fade into a blur of gray and white. Every sound, the crunch of snow, the sigh of the wind, the faint creak of dead branches, blended into a rhythm that guided him forward. As he walked, he began to hum softly, the same melody his mother used to sing while baking bread. The notes came out thin and trembling, but they gave him something to hold on to. The song was a rope tied to the world that was gone, pulling him through the emptiness of the one that remained. Far ahead, he began to see shapes moving in the fog. Fences, hay bales, the outline of a barn. His heart quickened. He stumbled toward them, slipping on the icy ground, his breath ragged. When he reached the first fence post, he leaned against it, panting. The scent of smoke was stronger now. There were footprints in the snow, large ones made by boots. A man's, perhaps. Hope flickered again, small but alive. He pressed his palm against the rough wood of the fence and whispered, "Please let them be kind." Then he noticed something carved into the wood, initials, half-faded, with a small cross beside them. He traced them gently with his finger. Whoever carved them had once believed in something. That, too, felt like a sign. The wind picked up again, pushing at his back as if urging him forward. He tightened his jaw, gathering the last of his courage, and began following the fence line toward the farmhouse. The ground sloped upward now, and the air filled with the faint sounds of life, the bark of a dog, the distant creak of a door, maybe a voice carried by the wind. His heart pounded faster. When he finally reached the gate, he stopped. Beyond it stood a small field, scattered with old farming tools and frozen rows of soil. In the middle of it, the farmhouse, tall, wooden, with a chimney puffing soft smoke into the air. A single lantern flickered by the door, painting the snow with a warm golden light. The boy gripped the gate with both hands, feeling the rough splinters bite into his skin. His throat was dry, his voice barely a whisper now. "Please," he murmured again. "I'll work for food." The dog barked once more, louder this time. A window opened, and a man's silhouette appeared in the faint glow. The boy froze. The wind stilled. For a heartbeat, all the world was silent. Just a hungry child, a worn gate, and a stranger's eyes meeting across the cold night. The farmhouse stood like an old guardian at the edge of the world, its wooden boards weathered, its roof patched with rusted tin. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the faint smell of bread and wood ash. It was the scent of life itself, and the boy's stomach twisted painfully at its promise. He pushed the creaking gate open with both hands. The hinges groaned, breaking the stillness of the evening. Snow crunched under his bare feet as he stepped into the yard. A dog barked again, deep, low, and warning. The boy froze, holding his breath. The animal came into view, a large brown shepherd, its fur thick and matted from the cold. It stopped a few feet away, Head low, eyes fixed on him. The boy raised his hands slowly. "It's all right," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." His voice trembled. For a moment, neither moved. Then, as if sensing the truth in the boy's fear, the dog stepped back and sat down, watching. Its growl faded into a soft whine. From the doorway came the sound of boots against the floor. The farmer appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, his face carved by years of wind and worry. A wool cap covered his graying hair, and his coat was patched, like the house itself. He stood in the doorway, saying nothing, eyes narrowing as he studied the boy. There was no anger in his gaze, but no warmth either, just the guarded look of a man who had seen too much loss. The boy swallowed hard and spoke, his voice barely more than a breath. "Please, sir. I'll work for food." The words hung between them like smoke, fragile, fading quickly in the cold air. The farmer didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. His eyes shifted to the satchel pressed against the boy's chest, then back to his face. Finally, he said, "You're not from around here." The boy shook his head. "No, sir." The farmer stepped down from the doorway, the snow crunching beneath his boots. He circled the boy slowly, as though inspecting a stray animal that had wandered too close. The dog followed his movements, tail still but ears alert. "Where's your family?" the farmer asked. The boy lowered his gaze. "Gone, sir." The man paused. A muscle twitched in his cheek. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking out toward the empty fields. The soil stretched for acres, lifeless and gray. "There's no work here," he said finally. "Nothing grows anymore." The boy clutched the strap of his satchel tighter. "I can carry wood. Clean. Anything, sir. I don't need much. Just a crust of bread." The farmer's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. He looked toward the house, where a curtain moved slightly. A woman was watching from inside, her face hidden behind the glass. The man sighed, his breath clouding in the air. "Wait here," he said gruffly and turned toward the door. The boy's knees weakened with relief. He nodded quickly, though the farmer was already gone inside. The dog trotted closer, sniffing at the boy's torn clothes. He reached out a trembling hand and patted its head. "Good boy," he whispered. The warmth of the animal's fur felt like mercy. Moments later, the farmer returned. In his hand was a small piece of bread, stale, cracked, but real. He held it out without a word. The boy's hands shook as he took it, whispering, "Thank you." He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were gold. The man watched in silence, his expression unreadable. When the boy finished, he wiped his mouth and stood straighter. "I can work now," he said. The farmer studied him for a long moment. Then he pointed toward the yard, where a pile of frozen logs lay stacked against the barn wall. "Move that wood inside before sunset," he said. "If you can do it, there'll be more bread." The boy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He set to work immediately. The wood was heavy, the ground slippery with ice. His fingers burned with cold, his arms trembling. Each log felt heavier than the last. The farmer watched from the doorway, his arms crossed. The dog stayed nearby, lying in the snow, its eyes following the boy's every movement. The sun began to sink behind the hills, painting the fields in shades of copper and gray. The boy's breath came in sharp bursts, his small body bent under the weight. But he didn't stop. Inside the house, the farmer's wife watched from behind the curtain, her hands clasped near her chest. "He's just a child," she whispered. The farmer didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the boy, his thoughts caught somewhere between suspicion and sorrow. When the last log was carried inside, the boy collapsed to his knees. His hands were raw, his breath ragged. He looked up at the farmer, waiting for his word. The man said nothing, only turned his gaze toward the fading sun, then back to the boy. For the first time that day, he nodded. And though his voice was gruff, there was something new in it, a faint echo of compassion long buried. "Come inside," he said, "before you freeze." The boy's lips parted, his eyes wide with disbelief. Somewhere in the distance, the wind eased, and the first star blinked to life in the cold sky. The warmth of the farmhouse touched the boy like a dream he wasn't sure he deserved. The air smelled of firewood and soup, a scent that wrapped itself around him, soft and cruel all at once, because it reminded him of everything he'd lost. The farmer stood by the door, arms folded, his boots leaving melting prints on the wooden floor. The dog lay near the threshold, tail tapping once, twice, then falling still again. The fire cracked softly in the hearth, and for a moment, the boy thought he heard his mother's voice in the rhythm of its crackle, whispering the same prayer she always whispered before supper. The farmer's wife appeared from the kitchen, her hands red from washing. She was not old, but grief had settled around her eyes like frost. She looked at the boy and hesitated, torn between caution and pity. "He's just skin and bone," she murmured. The farmer didn't reply. His face remained a stone. He turned to the boy. "Sit by the fire," he said finally. The boy obeyed at once, lowering himself slowly to the floor beside the hearth. The heat licked at his numb fingers. He stretched them toward the flames, and for the first time in many days, he felt them again. His palms were raw and split, small rivers of red against pale skin. The woman disappeared briefly, then returned with a bowl of soup, thin, watery, but steaming. She knelt and set it in front of him. "Eat," she said softly. The boy looked up at her, his voice trembling. "Thank you, ma'am." He lifted the bowl with both hands and drank greedily, though he tried to slow himself, afraid they might take it away if he seemed desperate. The soup burned his throat, but he didn't care. Each sip felt like life itself finding its way back into him. When the bowl was empty, he wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve and bowed his head. "I can work more, sir. Please, I'll do anything." The farmer didn't speak. He stood staring into the fire, his face half hidden in the flickering light. His wife looked between them, her hands twisting the edge of her apron. "You can't send him away tonight," she said quietly. "It's freezing." The man's jaw tightened. "There are rules," he muttered. "Rules," she repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "And what good have they done? We follow the rules and still the world burns." The boy's eyes darted between them. His heart pounded. He wanted to speak but didn't dare. He could feel that he had stepped into something deeper than hunger, into the quiet war between mercy and fear. At last, the farmer turned to him. "Where are you from?" The boy hesitated. "Far," he said. "Across the hills. Were there others with you?" He swallowed hard. "My mother," he whispered. "But she's gone." The woman's lips parted as though to speak, but she didn't. The boy reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. Yellowed, worn, the edges nearly gone. He held it out. "She left me this." The farmer took it carefully. His fingers brushed the edge of the child's hand. He opened the paper. The writing was faint but still there, lines of a mother's love written in trembling ink. "My dear son, if this world is cruel, do not let your heart become cruel too. Work hard, be kind, and remember, bread can fill the belly, but kindness feeds the soul." The farmer read the words twice before handing it back. His throat felt tight, though he didn't show it. "Your mother was a wise woman," he said gruffly. The boy clutched the paper to his chest. "She prayed every day," he whispered. "She said God still walks among broken things." The farmer looked away quickly, staring back into the fire. The light flickered across his face, revealing a depth of sorrow that had long been buried. He didn't speak for a long while. Then he said, "There's a barn out back. It's warmer than the night. You can sleep there." The boy's breath caught. "Truly, sir." The farmer nodded once. "But only for tonight." The boy stood, his small legs shaking. "Thank you, sir. I'll be gone by morning. I promise." The woman stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "No promises," she said softly. "Just rest." The farmer grabbed a lantern and opened the door. The wind rushed in, biting and cold. "Come," he said. The boy followed him outside. The snow had stopped, but the night was dark and still. The only sound was the crunch of their feet and the distant call of the wind. The barn loomed ahead, old, wooden, leaning slightly under its own weight. Inside, The air smelled of hay and dust. The farmer set down the lantern and pointed to a pile of straw near the wall. "There," he said. "It's not much, but it's dry." The boy nodded. "Thank you." The man turned to leave but stopped at the door. "What's your name, boy?" The child hesitated. "Elias," he said softly. The farmer nodded once, then stepped out into the night. The door creaked shut behind him, leaving Elias alone with the faint glow of the lantern and the sound of the wind pressing against the wood. He lay down on the straw, pulling his thin coat tight around him. The warmth of the soup still lingered in his belly. Before his eyes closed, he whispered a prayer, not for himself but for the farmer and his wife. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, as if heaven itself was covering the earth with forgiveness. Dawn came slow and gray, spreading thin light across the valley like a tired hand brushing over dust. The snow had stopped in the night, leaving the world wrapped in silence. Only the faint caw of a distant crow broke the still air. Elias woke to the sound of the barn door creaking open. The farmer stood there, framed in the pale morning light. His breath formed small clouds in the air. "You're awake early," he said. "Yes, sir," Elias murmured, rising quickly. He brushed straw from his coat and rubbed his arms for warmth. His small body ached from the cold, but he forced a smile. "I can start working now." The farmer studied him a long moment, unreadable. Then he gestured toward the yard. "There's wood to be moved. The pile by the fence. All of it goes inside before the sun drops." Elias nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir." He followed the farmer outside. The land stretched wide and white, still sleeping beneath its frozen blanket. The farmhouse windows glowed softly from within. Smoke drifted upward from the chimney, fading into the sky. The pile of wood stood by the fence, a mountain of heavy logs, their surfaces glazed with ice. Elias's breath caught when he saw it. There must have been hundreds. But he said nothing. He only bowed his head and began. The first log was heavier than he expected. He gripped it with both hands, his small fingers burning against the cold bark. The frost bit through his skin, and he gritted his teeth as he lifted it. Step by step, he carried it toward the barn. His knees trembled, but he didn't stop. The farmer leaned against the fence, arms folded. He said nothing, only watched. The dog sat beside him, tail flicking slowly through the snow. Elias worked. Again and again. Log after log. The sound of wood striking would echo through the quiet morning. A slow, steady rhythm, like the beating of a tired heart. By midday, his breath came in short gasps. His hands had split open, thin lines of red against the white bark. He paused only once, wiping sweat and snow from his forehead. His stomach growled loudly, but he ignored it. The farmer's wife came to the doorway once or twice, watching. Once she whispered something to her husband, but he only shook his head. "Let him work," he said quietly. Hours passed. The light began to fade, turning the fields the color of silver ash. Elias's arms shook with every lift, his legs buckling beneath the weight. But he refused to stop. Each log carried was a prayer, each breath a cry of faith. At last, as the sun sank behind the hills, he reached for the final piece of wood. It slipped from his numb fingers and fell into the snow. He bent down, picked it up again, and dragged it the last few feet to the barn. When he set it down, his vision blurred. The world spun softly. Then everything went still. He dropped to his knees, panting. His hands rested in the snow, streaked with blood. The cold bit into the open skin, but he didn't move. He lifted his head slowly toward the farmhouse. The farmer was still there, unmoving, watching. "I'm finished, sir," Elias whispered. His voice cracked into the wind. For a long moment, the farmer didn't answer. His face was hidden in the fading light. The dog gave a low whine, sensing the boy's exhaustion. Then, finally, the farmer stepped forward. His boots left deep prints in the snow as he approached. He stopped in front of Elias, looking down at him in silence. Elias lifted his eyes. "I did it," he said weakly. "All of it." The farmer crouched down. He saw the boy's hands, raw, shaking, small as bird bones. Something stirred deep inside him, something he thought the war had buried forever. "You did," he said quietly. Elias nodded, swaying slightly. May I have more bread?" The man hesitated. He wanted to keep his distance, to remind himself that mercy always came with a cost. But the boy's eyes, full of exhaustion and innocence, broke through the walls he'd built around his heart. He sighed. "Wait here," he said, turning toward the house. Elias sat back in the snow, watching the man's figure disappear into the warm light. He closed his eyes, too tired even to pray. A few minutes later, the farmer returned, not with bread, but with a bowl of soup and a blanket. He knelt beside the boy, placing them gently on the ground. "Eat," he said. "Then come inside." Elias blinked up at him, unsure if he'd heard right. "Inside." The farmer nodded once. "You've earned it." The boy's lips parted in disbelief. He took the bowl in his shaking hands, sipping slowly, tasting warmth and kindness in every drop. His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. The farmer watched him quietly. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. Elias looked up. "Your son," he guessed softly. The man froze. The question hit like a blade made of memory. He turned his face away, eyes glistening. "Eat your soup," he said. "It's getting cold." The dog pressed its nose against Elias's shoulder, tail thumping once in the snow. For the first time in years, the farmer felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel, the fragile, burning ache of hope. The farmhouse was quiet that evening. Snow drifted lazily past the window, settling in soft white heaps on the wooden sill. Inside, the fire burned low, its light flickering over the rough walls and the farmer's lined face. Elias sat wrapped in a wool blanket near the hearth. The warmth made him drowsy, but his eyes still glimmered with gratitude. The bowl of soup rested empty beside him. For the first time in weeks, his stomach no longer hurt. The farmer sat at the table, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. His wife stood by the window, watching the snow fall as though it might reveal something she'd long forgotten. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken things. Outside, the wind hummed through the cracks of the old wood. The dog slept by the door, its slow breathing the only sound of peace in the room. After a long while, the farmer spoke. "You worked hard today." Elias nodded sleepily. "Yes, sir." The man's gaze lingered on him. The boy's hands were bandaged now, wrapped in strips of clean cloth. Even so, they trembled slightly as he held the edge of the blanket close to his chin. "You shouldn't have done it all at once," the farmer said quietly. "You could have stopped." Elias shook his head. "You asked me to finish before sunset. So I did." The man's lips pressed together. He was used to people making excuses, not keeping promises. The boy's obedience, his quiet, wordless faith, unsettled him. "Why did you come here, Elias?" he asked after a moment. The boy hesitated. "I was looking for work. For food. That's all." Elias lowered his gaze to the fire. "And maybe kindness," he whispered. The farmer's chest tightened. He glanced at his wife. She stood still by the window, her reflection trembling in the frost-covered glass. Her eyes met his for the briefest second, and something passed between them, the same silent understanding that had once existed before loss had buried it. The boy shifted, his voice small. "My mother used to say that when you knock long enough, a door always opens, even if just a crack." The farmer looked at him for a long moment. Then, almost against his will, he asked, "Did she teach you to pray?" "Yes, sir," Elias said softly. "Every night. Even when the sky was empty." The man's eyes dropped to his rough hands. He hadn't prayed since the war took his son. He'd buried his faith in the same earth where the boy had been laid. To hear the word now, from the mouth of another child, felt like something breaking open inside him. He rose abruptly from the chair and walked to the small cabinet near the wall. From the top shelf, he took a loaf of bread, still warm, wrapped in cloth. He broke it in half and brought one piece to the boy. "Eat," he said gruffly. "There's more where that came from." Elias stared up at him, his eyes wide. "But sir, I already had." Eat, the man repeated, softer this time. Elias obeyed, taking a small bite. The crust cracked between his teeth, warm and fragrant. He chewed slowly as though afraid the moment would vanish. The farmer turned back to the window, where the snow fell heavier now, softening the world into silence. "You remind me of my Jacob," he said quietly. The woman turned her head. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. Elias looked up. "Jacob." "Our son," the farmer said, voice rough. "He was about your age when the soldiers came. Thought he could protect the house." His hand clenched at his side. "He didn't make it." Elias's breath caught. "I'm sorry, sir." The man nodded once, jaw tightening. "Don't be. You didn't bring the war." The fire popped, sending a spark upward. The woman came closer, laying a gentle hand on her husband's shoulder. "It's all right," she whispered. For the first time in years, he didn't pull away. He looked at her hand, small, fragile, still warm, and felt the weight of all he'd been holding fall just a little lighter. He turned back toward the boy. Elias had finished his bread and was looking at the flames, eyes reflecting gold. There was something holy in that small, tired face, something that shouldn't have survived but did. The farmer's voice softened. "If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe," the narrator might have said, had this been told aloud, a whisper to remind the world that miracles still grow in silence. The man exhaled slowly, as if surrendering to something greater than himself. "You can stay here," he said finally. Elias blinked. "Stay? For how long?" The farmer's eyes met his. "For as long as you need to." The boy's lips parted, but no words came. He looked down quickly, afraid the tears would fall. The farmer's wife knelt beside him, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. "You're safe now," she said. Outside, the snow thickened, covering the land like a white blessing. The farmer turned toward the fire again, his voice almost a whisper. "Maybe the good Lord still walks among broken things after all." Elias closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he slept without fear. Morning came wrapped in golden light, soft and pale through the frosted window. The air smelled of wood smoke, milk, and something Elias had not smelled since his mother was alive. Freshly baked bread. He stirred on the small cot near the fire, blinking awake. The blanket that covered him was warm and heavy, smelling faintly of lavender. The sounds of the house, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of voices, filled the silence that used to haunt his dreams. The farmer sat at the table, mending a leather strap, while his wife moved quietly around the kitchen. She was humming a hymn, one Elias knew, though he hadn't heard it in a long time. It was a tune about trust, about light returning after the storm. He lay there for a moment, just listening. The soft rhythm of domestic life felt unreal, like something from another world. The woman turned and saw him awake. Her face brightened with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Elias," she said. "You slept well, I hope." He sat up quickly, unsure if he was allowed to speak so freely. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." "Come," she said, motioning him to the table. "You'll need strength if you're going to help with the chores." Elias stood and walked over, still barefoot, his steps cautious. The wooden floor was smooth beneath his feet, not cold like the earth outside, but warm, touched by life. The woman placed a loaf of bread on the table, steam rising from its golden crust. She sliced a thick piece and set it before him, along with a mug of milk. He hesitated. "I can't, ma'am. It's too much." Her smile deepened. "It's just enough." The farmer didn't look up from his work. "Eat, boy," he said. "Bread doesn't last long if you stare at it." Elias picked up the slice, the crust crackling under his fingers. He took a bite. The flavor flooded him, soft, sweet, real. He closed his eyes, savoring it. A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. The woman pretended not to see, turning back to her dough. But the farmer noticed. He set down his work and watched the boy silently, something stirring deep within him. A memory, a ghost. When Elias finished, he wiped his hands carefully and looked up. "Thank you," he said softly. "I can help now. Please, tell me what to do." The farmer nodded toward the window. "Chop kindling for the stove." "The axe is by the barn. But be careful, it's sharp." "Yes, sir," Elias said, standing quickly. Outside, the morning air was crisp, the snow glinting under the pale sun. The world felt cleaner somehow, gentler. He found the axe leaning against the wall, its handle worn smooth by years of use. He lifted it with both hands and began to work, small pieces of wood falling neatly into a growing pile. His arms ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that comes with belonging somewhere, even for a day. From the doorway, the farmer watched him for a moment. The rhythm of the boy's work, steady, careful, determined, reminded him of his own son when he was that age. He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred, and wondered if God had sent this child not to be helped, but to help him. When Elias came back inside, his cheeks were red from the cold. The woman smiled and handed him another piece of bread, this one with butter melting on top. "Is this for me?" he asked, hesitant. "For you," she said. "And maybe for your mother too, wherever she is." He held the bread for a moment, then whispered, "She'd be happy you said that." The farmer looked up then, his voice quieter than before. "Your mother raised you right, boy." Elias nodded slowly. "She said hunger isn't the worst thing. The worst is when people forget how to care." The room went silent after that. The woman turned her face away, eyes glistening. The farmer reached for his cup, his hands trembling slightly. After a long pause, he said, "When my son was your age, he used to steal bread from the cooling rack before supper. I'd pretend not to notice." Elias smiled faintly. "Did he get caught?" The man chuckled, a sound that surprised even him. "Every time." The laughter lingered between them like sunlight. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted by loss. It felt alive. Later that day, as the snow began to fall again, the farmer taught Elias how to tie rope, fix a hinge, and feed the animals. The dog followed them everywhere, tail wagging like a small banner of joy. By evening, the boy's hands were blistered but proud. When the woman called them in for supper, he looked at the table with quiet wonder. 3 bowls, 3 pieces of bread, 1 family. As they bowed their heads to pray, the farmer's deep voice faltered for a moment. He hadn't said grace in years. But tonight, the words came easily. "Lord, thank you for this bread," he said, "and for the boy who brought light back to this house." Elias opened his eyes, his heart full and still. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Thank you, Mama. You were right. Kindness feeds the soul." Outside, the snow fell softer now, like a benediction. That night, the fire burned low again. A hush settled over the farmhouse, the kind of silence that only winter knows, soft and deep, like a blanket laid over the world. Elias slept curled on the small cot by the hearth, one arm tucked beneath his head, the other resting over his satchel. The wooden cross on his chest glimmered faintly in the firelight. His breathing was steady, peaceful. The farmer sat by the table, turning his mug slowly in his rough hands. Across from him, his wife mended a tear in his coat, her needle glinting in the dim light. Neither spoke. For a long time, the man just stared into the fire. The boy's presence had stirred something old inside him, a warmth he didn't trust, a faith he thought had died with the war. At last, he spoke quietly. "He reminds me of Jacob." His wife looked up. Her eyes softened. "Yes," she whispered. "He does." They sat in silence again, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the faint whisper of the wind against the windows. After a while, the farmer's gaze fell on the boy's satchel. It was worn, frayed at the seams, its buckle barely holding. He hesitated, then stood and walked toward it. Carefully, he knelt and touched the flap. Inside, he found little: a few twigs tied with string, a broken comb, a small piece of bread wrapped in paper, and a folded letter yellowed with age. He hesitated again. Then, slowly, he unfolded it. The handwriting was delicate, shaky but careful. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent that clung to the blanket the woman had given the boy. He began to read. "My dear Elias, if you are reading this, then I am gone. Do not be afraid. Remember that love never dies, even when bodies do. Keep walking toward the light, my son. Do not let hunger or cruelty change your heart. If ever you meet someone who is kind, help them remember that mercy still exists. The world forgets, but a single act of goodness can keep it alive. And if you ever find a place that feels like home, stay, not because you are safe, but because you are loved. God walks with you, even when you cannot see his feet in the snow. Your mother. By the time he reached the end, the farmer's vision had blurred. He wiped at his eyes roughly with the back of his hand, pretending it was just the smoke. But his wife had been watching quietly, and she knew. "Read it to me," she said softly. He did, every word, his voice breaking once, then again. When he finished, the house fell utterly silent. Even the fire seemed to pause. The woman rose and crossed the room, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She wrote that for us too," she whispered. The farmer nodded, unable to speak. They both looked toward the boy sleeping by the fire, his small chest rising and falling, his face serene in the flickering light. The dog had curled beside him, nose resting against his feet, as if keeping watch. The man reached down, touching the edge of the letter again. "He's been carrying her faith with him," he said quietly. "Through every mile." His wife smiled faintly through tears. "Maybe that's why he found us." The farmer folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the satchel, exactly where it had been. He hesitated, then covered the boy with another blanket, tucking it gently around his shoulders. Elias stirred slightly but didn't wake. His lips moved in his sleep, whispering something too soft to hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe just a memory. The farmer knelt there a moment longer, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "You've done more for us than you'll ever know," he murmured. When he stood, the woman met his eyes. "He should stay," she said simply. The man nodded. "He will." They sat together by the fire until the first light of dawn began to touch the windows. The snow outside glowed faintly, as if the earth itself were beginning to forgive. When Elias awoke the next morning, he found the farmer sitting at the table, the fire already blazing high. The man smiled, not a small, uncertain smile this time, but a real one. "Morning, Elias," he said. "Hope you're hungry. We've got work to do." The boy blinked in surprise. "Work, sir." The farmer nodded. "A farm doesn't heal itself. You're staying on to help me bring it back to life, if you're willing." Elias's heart leapt. "Truly, sir." The man chuckled, handing him a mug of warm milk. "Truly. But first, breakfast." Elias took the cup, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." The farmer shook his head. "You already haven't." Outside, the morning light spread over the frozen fields, touching them with the faintest promise of spring. The first light of dawn spilled softly across the fields, turning the frost into 1,000 shards of glass. The world felt new, not because it had changed, but because someone inside the farmhouse finally had. Elias stepped outside with the farmer, his small boots crunching against the snow. The air was sharp and clean, the sky pale and endless. The boy held a wooden bucket in his hands, his breath rising in thin white clouds. The farmer walked beside him, a shovel slung over his shoulder. He didn't speak at first. His steps were steady, confident, the way of a man who had worked the land his whole life. But now there was something softer in his stride, a quiet purpose, an echo of hope. "Ground's frozen deep," he muttered, stabbing the shovel into the earth. "Won't give much for a while yet." Elias knelt beside him, touching the edge of the soil. "Maybe if we start small," he said, "we could clear just one patch." The man smiled faintly. "One patch, huh?" The boy nodded, serious. "That's how Mama said things grow, one seed, one prayer at a time." The farmer paused, leaning on his shovel. He looked down at the child, his breath catching. For years, he had cursed the soil, cursed the heavens, cursed the silence of God. But now, with the boy's hands pressed gently into the earth, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Life waiting to return. "All right," he said quietly. "One patch it is." Together they worked, clearing a small square of frozen ground near the barn. The dog followed them, wagging its tail, occasionally digging with its paws as if trying to help. The air filled with the sound of scraping metal and the soft thud of turned soil. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, painting the snow with light. Elias's cheeks were red from the cold, but he smiled as he worked. Each time he lifted a clump of soil, he whispered something under his breath, words the farmer couldn't quite hear. "What are you saying, boy?" the man asked finally. Elias looked up, shy but smiling. "Praying for the ground." The farmer chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You think the dirt listens?" Elias shrugged. "God does. And he made the dirt, didn't he?" The man stopped, shovel in midair. The answer, simple as it was, struck him deeper than he expected. He looked around, at the field, the mountains, the endless white. And for the first time in years, the world didn't look dead to him. It looked waiting. By midday, they had cleared enough space for a small garden. The farmer wiped sweat from his brow, despite the cold. "We'll need seed," he said. "I can find some," Elias offered. "Sometimes the crows drop grain near the fence." The farmer grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. "You really believe in this, don't you?" Elias met his eyes. "Yes, sir. Because my mother said faith doesn't make sense, it makes change." The man's laughter was quiet, but it came from somewhere deep, somewhere clean. "Your mother was a wise woman." The boy smiled. "She'd say you are too, sir." The farmer's laughter stopped, replaced by something gentler. "Gratitude, maybe." He bent down and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You can call me Thomas," he said. "No need for sir." Elias hesitated. "Thomas," he repeated softly, as if testing the sound. The man smiled. "There you go." From the house, the smell of soup drifted through the air. The farmer's wife stood by the doorway, watching them. Her eyes shone with quiet pride. When they came inside, she set bowls on the table and smiled at the boy. "Looks like you two made peace with the earth," she said. Thomas nodded. "With more than that, I think." After they ate, the farmer showed Elias how to fix the fence and check the traps for rabbits. The boy followed him everywhere, listening, learning, asking questions. The dog trotted happily at their heels, as though guarding a new beginning. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in pink and gold, the farmer and the boy stood together at the edge of the field. Elias held a handful of tiny seeds, leftovers the woman had saved from better years. He looked up at Thomas. "Can we plant them now?" The farmer hesitated, then smiled. "It's too early," he said, "but maybe we can try anyway." Elias knelt down, pressing one small seed into the cold ground. "Then it'll be the first to believe." The man's breath caught. He knelt beside the boy, covering the seed gently with soil. Together they whispered a prayer. Not long, not grand, but real. "Bless this land, Lord," the farmer said quietly, "and the hands that brought faith back to it." When they stood, the last light of day wrapped them both in gold. The boy looked out over the barren field, and for the first time since his mother's death, he believed that spring would come. The months passed slowly, like a hymn sung beneath a patient sky. The snows melted. The ground softened. And for the first time in years, the valley began to smell of earth again. Wet soil, new roots, and the faint sweetness of life returning. Elias worked beside Thomas every day. They mended fences, fed animals, sowed seeds where once only ashes lay. The boy's laughter, light and unguarded, filled the air that had long been silent. It echoed through the fields like birdsong, stirring something in the land itself. Thomas's wife, Mary, often watched from the window, her hands resting on the sill. The boy's small frame moving among the furrows reminded her of her own son, Jacob. But the grief that used to choke her when she remembered now softened into gratitude. God had sent another child, not to replace what was lost, but to teach them that love could still grow in the ruins. When spring finally came, green pushed its way through the brown. Shoots of wheat rose timidly from the earth. Thomas stood with Elias one morning, the sun shining warm across their faces. "You see that?" he said, smiling. "That's life saying thank you." Elias grinned. "It's beautiful." "It's a miracle," the farmer replied quietly. They worked until their hands were dark with soil, until sweat replaced the frost. Elias no longer looked like the fragile boy who had stumbled to the gate that frozen night. His cheeks had color again, His eyes carried light. The cross around his neck shone like new under the sun. That evening, Mary called them in for supper. On the table sat a loaf of bread, golden and round, steam rising from its crust. She had baked it with the first flour ground from their new wheat, the first crop since the war. Elias stared at it in wonder. His heart swelled. Mary smiled at his expression. "Go on," she said. "It's yours as much as ours." The boy looked to Thomas, who nodded gently. "You earned it, Elias. Every crumb." He reached for the loaf, his hands trembling slightly. The scent of it, warm, sweet, alive, filled the room. He broke the bread carefully as though it were something sacred, and handed the first piece to Thomas, the second to Mary. Only then did he take a small piece for himself. As they bowed their heads to pray, the firelight danced across their faces. Thomas's deep voice filled the room, steady, reverent. "Lord, once this house was empty. The fields were dead, and our hearts were colder than the soil. But you sent a child with nothing but faith, and through him you taught us to live again. Bless this bread, and bless the hands that shared it." When he finished, silence fell, the kind of silence that feels holy. Elias lifted his eyes. For a moment, he could almost see his mother's face in the flickering flame, smiling proud. He felt tears slip down his cheeks, but they weren't from sadness. They were from fullness, a heart finally fed. That night, after supper, Thomas led Elias outside. The sky was scattered with stars, the air mild and gentle. The fields glowed faintly under the moonlight, each sprout shimmering like a promise kept. Thomas placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You know," he said, "I used to think God had forgotten this land. But maybe he was just waiting to send you." Elias looked up at him, his voice soft. "Maybe he was waiting for you to open the door." The man smiled, a deep, weathered smile that came from somewhere far inside. "You'll have a home here for as long as you want it, son." "Home," Elias repeated, the word strange on his tongue but warm in his chest. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll stay." The wind moved through the wheat, whispering like a prayer. The dog barked once, then lay down near their feet. The stars shimmered above, endless and bright, like 1,000 small lights blessing the earth. Thomas turned toward the house. "Come on," he said softly. "Your mother would want you to rest." Elias lingered a moment longer, looking out over the fields, the once dead land now breathing again. He closed his eyes and whispered into the night, "Thank you." And though the wind carried no voice back, he felt, somehow, that heaven had heard. The boy who once begged, "Please, I'll work for food," had been fed, not only with bread but with belonging. The farmer who once lived behind walls of grief now laughed again beneath an open sky. And the land, once barren, bloomed like faith reborn. Sometimes, the narrator's voice would say, soft as dawn, the bread that fills us isn't baked in an oven, it's grown in the soil of mercy. Sparkles, if this story touched your heart, please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. It's our dream to reach 1,000 hearts listening to stories of faith, redemption, and the quiet miracles that still happen in the coldest corners of the world. Globe showing Europe-Africa yellow heart.